let me just say I'm Jeremy Lent for people who are new to here. And I'm very glad to welcome you to this month's Deep Transformation Live Network meeting. And well, what is obviously top of mind for all of us, I'm sure right now, is these terrible, violent events unfolding in the world, and just the terror that so many people are feeling directly as being at the um, receiving end of this terrible militarized violence, and also just an overall sense that people, and I think, sharing all around the world, like, where is this going? Things are just, and even whatever, even sort of semblance of hypocritical or whatever it was, form of order that kept the world, at least on a relative basis, like stable and peaceful for um, decades with all the ups and downs, seems like it's just unraveling. And as we're sort of going into this session today, I want to remind people of that speech that probably you're all remembering, right, from Mark Carney at Davos that he gave in January, which really inspired a lot of us when he talked about the reality of what was going on. And he talked about the need for what he said, like new coalitions to resist great power rivalry. And the idea of actually looking at this realistic assessment of what's going on and having a strengthened alliance based on shared values by those who weren't willing to just fall into this kind of morass of power politics and power struggles. And today's session is actually around something that, in a way, may become almost like a model for the very thing that Mark Carney was talking about. And this has to do with the whole climate conference and the whole climate discussion, which, of course, everyone here knows has been going on. Really, the conference of the party has been going on for 30 years, um, and has basically, in many ways, failed as the temperatures keep going up and decisions aren't made. And at the end of COP30, the end of last year, once again, there was even trying to get final text to talk about transitioning away from fossil fuels. The most basic thing imaginable was stymied by this group of oil-producing nations. Of course, the US had already just left and boycotted it anyway, but like countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia. But at COP, the countries weren't willing to just accept this stalemate. And so at the end of COP30, Colombia and the Netherlands announced that they were going to be co-hosting the first international conference on a just transition away from fossil fuels, which is going to be taking place in April 2026. And this has the potential to coordinate governments who actually want to work to do something positive in light of everything unraveling around us, which is why this may be a great model for all that we're facing today. And I'm so grateful that today we have two prominent activists who have been involved in these events and who can help us to understand them better, to understand the details and the larger context way better. And so we're going to be joined today by Osprey Orielle Lake. So, sorry for that. Great to have you here, Osprey, and it's lovely to see you again. And we'll come back to the different talks we've had with you here in the DTN in a moment. And Stuart Cowan. Um, hey there, Stuart. And Osprey, some of you probably remember, um, is we know her from the book she wrote a couple of years ago, and The Story is in Our Bones. And we had a wonderful live conversation here in the DTN when that first came out. And Osprey is founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, which, if the acronym for that is We Can, which makes so much sense. Also serves on the steering committee of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we'll be talking about. Austria has a lot to say about exactly what's been going on around this. She's been very involved in the trenches, basically. And Stuart, welcome, Stuart, is the executive director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, which I know many of you follow, which is involved in a lot of different regenerative, bioregional, rewilding projects, some of them, as we'll see, relating to this just transition initiative. And our structure today, as we usually do, this whole session is 75 minutes. We'll spend about 30 minutes or so right now just in conversation. Um, and as we do so, if you have questions, thoughts, comments, whatever, I invite you to put them in the chat. Great way for us to sort of connect with each other, almost like a mycelial network of our collective intelligence. Then we'll go into breakout groups for about 10 minutes. It gives a chance for our worldwide community to really get connected together, where we'll talk about something related to these topics. Then we'll come back and we'll have about 30 minutes of a general Q&A where you can just engage in conversation with Osprey and with Stuart in relation to all that we're talking about today. So that's where we're going to go. And let me turn first to you, Osprey. And really great to have you back here again. And I remember you actually joined another of our live monthly meetings very early in the DTN's process. It was right after a COP proceeding, and it was wonderful to really get your sort of feeling of being on the ground around that. And I remember the time, the topic we had was, is COP basically just a total failed institution? And you pointed out, actually, it's more nuanced than that. And you offered really interesting perspectives. So let me just turn to you right now and ask you if you could tell us a little bit about sort of deep context, if you will, about the COP process in general, where it's gotten to and where it hasn't gotten to, and what is the undergoing stalemates that we're looking at.
Great. Well, first of all, hello to everyone. It's great to be with all of you again. And for those of you who are new, yeah, pleasure to be here. And I was just saying before we jumped on the call how critical it is actually that we are connecting networks. I operate in several very large networks. I'm sure that Stuart does as well. I know Jeremy does, and all of you perhaps too. Given the gravity of this moment, I find these conversations to be really valuable beyond sharing information, but also the fact that we need to be connected as a movement, um, generally speaking, because we're up against such terrific moments of existential crisis at so many levels. So I just wanted to begin by thanking you all for being here and the need for us to be that good mycelial network growing.
Mhm. Exactly.
Um, So yeah, I think how I sort of want to get into the conversation about the
Yeah.
COP contextually is that, right now we're seeing in every arena, to put it in short terms, because I don't want to talk too long. I know I want to make sure we get into a conversation here, but um, the wealthy elite are consolidating their power, is the
Mhm.
shortest way I can say it. And it's the most dangerous time any of us have lived in, whether any topic you want to talk about. And these systems that have been in place for a long time, from colonization, patriarchy, racism, are systems of how we run our economy in an extractive world, are coming out to their zenith moment. And we're seeing it displayed in the most violent, vile ways possible.
Mhm.
And while we're dealing with this war that is going on now and this ongoing, it feels like the floor just keeps dropping every day.
Right.
Um, how do we keep also in touch with the fact that nature is not waiting? The biosystem collapses, climate are not going to go on hold because we're having international problems. And within all of that going on, that progress of nature and science doesn't stop. We're part of this evolutionary living planet. And
Mhm.
so we have this COP process, and as Jeremy has said, here we are 30 years later. We had COP 30 in Brazil at the end of last year. Um, and we're nowhere near where governments need to be. That said, it is literally the only functioning multilateral process we have where all governments meet. So,
Mhm.
as much as many of us would love to toss it out, it actually doesn't serve us right now. We need any place where we can convene and move
Mhm.
agendas along to be working in concert. So, yes, at one level, the COP space will never, it is a compromise space that can never produce a answer for climate, but it is an essential part of the machinery of what needs to happen. So, in short, what happened at the end of last year, COP30, there was the failure of governments to put fossil fuel phase out into the final documents,
Mhm.
even though 80 countries agreed that they wanted that phase out in there. This is why I started talking about at the beginning the wealthy elite consolidating power. Wherever you look, we are up against these consolidating powers, whether you want to call it the techno billionaires or the extremists religiously, however you want to
Mhm.
frame that group of people, there is great opposition. And so what happened is that for a while now, something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty for the last 4 years, which I'm on the steering committee of, have really been pushing governments on the sidelines to have a parallel process outside of the UNFCCC. And
Mhm.
what's really exciting, as Jeremy said, is it's finally coming into fruition. And I think it's
Right.
because people
Yeah.
got so frustrated at the end of COP to say, okay, we've got to make this happen now.
Yeah.
And so this conference is happening in Colombia, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, but it's really exciting that it is being manifested. And I think in terms of the COP30 process that I think is important to mention before we leave it is that even though at the large sort of takeaways from there, we might have seen that large failure, which is significant, it's also important to acknowledge that many of us have been working for years to get governments to agree onto a just transition work program. And that was a
Right.
major victory. The just transition mechanism was adopted by all countries. And the reason this is so important is it's a
Mhm.
massive opening for civil society to do things like advocate for indigenous rights, to be able to have rights of nature mentioned, to be able to see biodiversity protection, to see regionalism take place, to make sure that we see issues of colonization addressed,
Mhm.
racism, that we see equity being front and centered. What is the just transition?
Right.
And granted, government interpretations of what just transition is looks different than what social movements are looking at or climate justice analyses. It is the door open, and it was an incredible victory with people like dancing in the hallways, excited about this. And then the
Wow.
last thing I'll
Yeah.
say is that I I cannot stress enough how important it was that indigenous peoples demanded that COP30 happen in the Amazon. We were
Wow.
literally in the Amazon at the mouth of the river into the Amazon. And the whole influence of being there in that forest, in that ancient forest that is important to the entire world, ecologically and spiritually, I would say. Um, to have that presence, so many indigenous people there, not well represented in the way that they should have been, but the influence was tremendous. And so part of the takeaway of this conference in Colombia, I think, was also
Yeah.
with the impetus of that, as well as something that the COP presidency from Brazil committed to, which is these two roadmaps that they're going to work on in terms of forest protection
Right.
of forests, as well as fossil fuel phase out that was formally brought into the process. So even though we can see in the big picture everything looked like it's collapsing, a lot of
Yeah.
good work happened that we should
This is
really
great.
build on.
This is great. This is fantastic. And I just want to say personally to us, Bray, I'm always amazed. I've seen you over the years how you're there in the trenches looking at the stuff right coming right at you. And yet you have this incredible ability to actually see what is possible, what is arising even in the face of all this destruction we see around us. And thank you so much for all that you're doing on that. And all that you would sing in terms of being there in in the jungle, basically, and how indigenous people and voices were actually beginning to get somewhat heard around the whole just transition, and even the dual tracks, not just the fossil fuels, but the forest protection, really relates, I believe, Stuart, a lot to what you have been working on in depth in a lot of the sort of bioregional and indigenous ways in which we can actually take some of these ideas and transform them, right? Not just so they're not just driven by nation states and top down, but actually driven by the people themselves. So do you want to describe a little bit more about how that intersects with everything Osprey has just been describing?
Yes, wonderful. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the lovely invitation. And Osprey, great to see you. And Jeremy, such a pleasure to be in this dialogue at really a difficult time for the planet in so many ways. So, alongside the COP process, which is focused on the nation states, obviously,
Hmm.
with their own very specific geopolitical interests, we're seeing two amazing simultaneous movements. And it's paradoxical. One of them is true planetarity. Planetarity is a
Hmm.
new kind of philosophical movement that really is saying the planet is alive. It's
Hmm.
alive from indigenous perspectives going back tens of thousands of years. And
Hmm.
finally, it's alive from the perspective of biological sciences, right? So Gaia theory was developed by Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock starting in the 1980s. And it's
Hmm.
gone through deep analysis, deep testing. It's real. We are part of a living planet. So we need to address the polycrisis as a living planet. We need to
Right.
connect with the planet as a whole. And if we think about climate, the planet's inflamed, right? So it's experiencing fevers in one place, chills in another. It's just literally inflamed and feverish. And we need to heal it. We need to heal the biosphere itself, the living film of the planet. That's half of addressing climate change, right? Half
Hmm.
is obviously phasing out GHGs immediately and storing as much carbon as we can. But at the same time, we need to heal living systems. We
Right.
need to restore ecosystems one by one. So if you look at that planet and say, we really could have planetary commons, right? Greenhouse gases are one
Yeah.
example, atmospheric greenhouse gases. That's a commons. And we've simply been misusing that commons.
Hmm.
Polluters haven't paid to emit into the commons properly. We're seeing carbon taxes here and there, but for the most part, there are virtually no taxes on carbon, let alone the other greenhouse gases. And we've just misused this commons beyond its functioning and viability.
Right.
So we look at the planet as alive, whales are migrating, vast glacier systems are ebbing and flowing. If we connect to life, it gives us a totally different way to think
Hmm.
about politics and think about these international negotiation processes. So
Yeah,
that's happening at
exactly.
the same
Mhm.
time that there's a wonderful decentralization movement, territories, often indigenous nations that are stewarding their territory. They're getting more and more land rights, more and more ability to govern, to
Hmm.
make their own decisions for
Yeah.
economic development pathways, landscapes, bioregions, watersheds, coming back to life, fiber sheds, food
Hmm.
sheds, city regions. So this sense of vibrant places that we can decarbonize in culturally appropriate ways, in very exciting ways. So decarbonization, this whole idea that we could have, say, a 10-year plan to literally get fossil fuels out of every aspect of an economy. It's so exciting. It's a design challenge. So we can think about this as from a regenerative design perspective, how do we design buildings that don't use fossil
Hmm.
fuels? We know how to do this. Transportation systems. How can we do agriculture in a way that actually stores enormous amounts of carbon? We know how to do this with regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
So it opens up this amazing creativity when we look at what individual bioregions can do as they begin to build political power, as they begin to federate. So we're seeing bioregions talking to each other across entire continents and really a global movement of place-based bioregional efforts,
Hmm.
which each can have their own just transition based on the local biocultural
Yeah.
realities.
That's great. Well, yeah, thank you, Stuart, for sharing that context, which ties again so much into what you, Osprey, write about in The Story Is in Our Bones, too, about exactly those kind of intersections. And let's take now that context and apply it in some more detail to the Columbia conference itself. Like you say, it's a design challenge, and this conference itself obviously will be looking at some of this. And maybe, Osprey, do you want to explain to us more about what this conference is going to be trying to do, and what, like, for example, as you through We and other groups get involved in it, what civil society, can play, the role they can play as part of this process.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you, Stuart, for your comments as well. Just to kind of weave things together,
Yeah.
one thing that, for me, and I don't think it's necessarily everyone's interest, but I think one of the things that many of us are working with in this space who love nature, who may have our own practices with the living earth, who are deeply engaged in, local regional work, like at Weekend, we
Uh-huh.
do a lot of work on reforestation and food sovereignty. So we're really engaged with a lot of indigenous peoples from around the world and a lot of these everyday projects to sequester carbon, to reforest, to protect forests, to grow food. And it is incredibly exciting. And also just the knowledge of regenerating a living cosmology that is also a part of how we're going to have this transition is like, how do we create a living cosmology to create politics from?
Hmm.
The reason I mention this is because when we jump now to your question around Colombia, I think
Yeah.
for many of us who kind of live in different worlds, and maybe people on this call are in that space as well, where we have, our own personal life that looks one way, and then politics looks another way, and culture can even look a different way.
Hmm.
And we're very unintegrated right now, which is not very helpful. And a lot of this comes from the architecture of supremacy, which is a whole conversation on its own, but we're in it and we're in these extractive economies, which makes forward progress really challenging. So for me, I don't see there being a solutions problem. To me,
Hmm.
there are gorgeous people doing fabulous work
Hmm.
that are creative and innovative. So I think we have to kind of look at where we stop gliding past each other, where there's sort of all these people doing amazing solutions, and then the people have power and control and financing. And how do we create some connective tissue there? And that's what Colombia, to me, is a lot about.
Uh-huh.
Because when I think about policy, this is a policy meeting, to be very clear, this
Right.
is a government meeting.
Yeah.
And surrounding that will be civil society pushing very hard, but the governments have to do this. That's what this particular piece is about. And how I sort of look at it is when I write a lot of policy briefs or I'm engaging right now on policy papers for this conference, is how do I take my love for nature and understanding of a living earth and translate that into some form of common modern day language and legal frameworks and
Yeah.
policy. Like, I think that's part of the project. Um, that might not excite everybody, but I think that's part of like framing and articulating and bringing incantation words to what we
Uh-huh.
want to see have happen. Um, so in Colombia, there's several processes going on. Governments are now meeting and forming their outline for what they want to accomplish at a
Uh-huh.
two-day meeting, April 28th and 29th. In the lead up to that, there are people's assemblies. One will be run by the government that they're having people participate in to get input from civil society. And then there are several days of civil society meeting, and that's already ongoing. And I can put some links into the chat where it's open. Anybody can participate in these assembly conversations and have input to the documents that are being formulated that will feed into the formal government meeting. And so there's this sense of like a big people's summit that is ongoing right now online, will take place on the ground in Colombia
Yeah.
for civil society to really have inputs. And the government is working very hard to have there be a really good connection because that's part of the problem. Also in the COP process, it's not that observers to the COP process with governments aren't there, but it's anybody who's done it knows it's incredibly frustrating. And I don't want to go into all the details, but there's formal constituencies where civil society does intervene at the COP, and that's very.
Right.
But how do we increase that? Because again, what we're talking about is how do we have the grassroots, people on the ground who are in lived experiences, who are being impacted the most, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Global South communities, women, all those who have been marginalized are, of course, the ones who we need to hear from the most because often the site of pain and the
Yeah.
site of harm is also the site of the best solutions because those are the people who are
Uh-huh.
already working their way out of apocalypse. And so we need to lift those voices up and make sure that they are going to the grass tops. And so that's part of the process we're engaged in that is open to everyone to participate in. So I think the excitement about Colombia is that inclusion. And then most importantly, the governments who are going to meet the cost of entry, if you will, is that you have to
Mhm.
be on board. Your government has to be on board with phase out. That's not true at the COP. You can totally be
Right.
not engaged in a phase out, want to continue fossil fuels, and you still have an equal seat at the table. That's part of the compromise of the COP space. That's not going to be happening here. So it's going to be really exciting to see how governments lay out a plan and outline what happens when they're freed from having to
Yeah.
constantly go back to square one. What are they actually going to do? The last thing I'll say is that, a lot of this also first round, though there needs to be many more, will be around finance.
Uh-huh.
How we view, we can never, ever get the economy off the table because while all this is going on, the underlying question is how do we get off an extractive economy, develop well-being economies, create equity? Because
Right.
in short, the global north has been extracting from the global south, has put the global south into debt, and
Yeah.
being expected to come forward with how they're going to have an energy transition with no money because they've been extracted from, and it's completely not fair. And so
Uh-huh.
this structure has to involve reparations funds, funds that are not linked to debt, funds for people to do the right thing because it's what they deserve and have earned through years of oppressive economic practices. So all
Right.
that is going to be bubbling up. It's probably going to be incredibly messy and all over the place, but that's okay. There'll be
Yeah.
this will be the first one, and then they're already planning the second one in Tuvalu next year from
In Tuvalu.
the island nations, which are also
Exactly.
in a terrifying situation of going underwater. So
Uh-huh.
this is going to be an interesting, messy process that I think will be really useful.
Love the way you describe that, Osprey. Thank you so much. And just a few big takeaways I'm taking, yeah, for us all to digest. One is I'm understanding you saying, so there'll actually be, and you'll share the links with us, an actual process bringing in ideas even before the meeting takes place. Is that right? Or and so that's something sounds like we can all engage in different ways. So that's really helpful to understand. And then the meeting itself then is not going to include those countries that are the fossil fuel countries trying to basically destroy life on Earth at a faster rate. And also, of course, the fossil fuel companies presumably will not be
No, they're
won't
not
be there. And they have been almost like totally pervading. There have been more fossil fuel
lobbyists.
consultants at COP than almost any other group there. It's almost like become the sort of fossil fuel meeting club or whatever in some ways. But that's not happening. So totally different kind of conversation. And I really want to focus attention a little bit and turn to you, Stuart, around this, is that notion of people's assemblies. And in this book that some people are aware, I've written Eco Civilization, looking at a third horizon, different transformed world. This, coming out in May. A big theme is the way we have to reframe democracy itself. In fact, we don't really even have democracy in what we think is democracy. It's more like oligarchy by consent and citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy and participatory budgeting are some of the crucial ways in which we can make these changes. And Stuart, I know you've been mentioning to me how you're aware of different indigenous groups using this kind of commons-based decision making who there's a potential may be involved in what happens in Colombia. Do you want to just give us a little bit of background on that?
Yes, and one of the interesting things about COP30 is a process was started called the Global Mutirao, which
Uh-huh.
was an effort to have citizens' assemblies at different levels of scale, and it was meant to continue. So there was kind of a nod to these very important other kinds of deliberative democracy, not
Right.
just kind of representative voting in a nation state, that there are many different kinds of governance, many ways to surface what people want to do with their lives in their places.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my favorite examples of this kind of profoundly local deliberative approach is
Yeah.
the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which brings together 30 different indigenous nations in Ecuador and Peru across 80 million acres. And it's a biodiversity, not a hotspot, this incredible place where the high Amazon rainforest is meeting the low Andes, and you're going through all these different ecosystems. So incredible biodiversity and really biocultural diversity. So this is a place that's faced extensive fossil fuel extraction. It's been a battle for decades. So these indigenous groups have fought off many projects, but many were implemented. They're at the front lines, and they're also a model for the world because each of the nations has put together what's called a bioregional plan. So it's a plan de
Hmm.
vida, it's a life plan for the territory that goes into depth around what might happen with health facilities, with food sovereignty, transportation, education, everything from a biocultural perspective. So the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance is supporting these life plans to receive effective funding, to receive policy
Hmm.
support. So the alliance will be there strongly represented and saying, look, the entire Amazon should become what we're calling a zone of life. It should be a non-fossil fuel extraction zone almost immediately. And it should be a place where we decommission existing fossil fuel infrastructure. So they're going to have that message loud and clear. No new extraction. Let's unwind the existing companies, projects, fossil fuel activities throughout the Amazon, starting in Amazon Sacred Headwaters territory. So it's profound because it's literally questioning the entire extractive basis of an economy. And fossil fuels are amongst the most destructive things, but there's
Right.
gold mining, all kinds of pretty destructive things, right? Deforestation for agriculture, all examples of not working with the vitality, the life of these communities. So what's emerging is a vision of a bioeconomy, a truly flourishing, a commons-based economy, one that's aligned with life, and a vision of economic flows also being aligned with life. So at COP30, the Alliance presented the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Fund, which is a
Right.
bold vision to bring tens of millions of dollars into these life plans to be locally determined, to be spent according to the governance structures of these indigenous territories. So very
Oh,
important
that's
to
great.
bring these huge global flows right down to
Yeah.
bioregional scale. And we're seeing very powerful ways to do this emerging around the
Yeah.
world.
And I want to add, this really relates to what Samantha Power and Tyler Wakefield and others have created with a biofi financing facility when they're working with Amazon Sacred Headwaters. And some of you may remember just a few months ago, we had Samantha and Tyler on the DTN to talk about biofi. And it really relates to your point, Osprey, about the financial flows too, because part of the problem with when financial flows do come to indigenous groups or the global south, usually comes with strings attached, or it comes with more debt and ends up like locking people in even more. So structuring these flows so that actually the power remains, the decision-making power remains with the people on the ground, whether indigenous or others connected to the earth, it's so crucially important. So thanks for that. And yeah, Osprey, you want to just follow on from
I
that?
just wanted to say something really quick about that. Thank you for the conversation. I just think it's really important to spotlight
Mhm.
that again, there have been a lot of incredible proposals, as Stuart mentioned, but also, when we look at Bhutan and their gross national happiness
Yeah.
indicator, we can look at donut economics. We can look at some of the great work that Jason Hickel is doing, and wonderful
Mhm.
economists, and different networks that are working on this, quote unquote, new economy, which might be actually a really old economy, if
Mhm.
we go back far enough. And I think it's just really critical to understand that we have a lot of ways we can work with the economy and understandings of reciprocity and all these different things that we know we
Right.
should be doing.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
we also need to really tackle the fact of who has the power and the funding right now.
Hmm.
So how do we have interventions in that space in the small time frame we have given the urgency of the climate
Right.
crisis? And I think that's like some of the hardest areas to tease out because all of that is well and good,
Hmm.
Right now, we're shooting for a 2.3 to 2.5 degree world where plants can't even photosynthesize. That's
Right.
not far away. So I don't want to be like, you know, uh, taking our conversation off rail, but I think it's just so important to understand all this within really impossible timelines that we need to somehow jump through. We need some leap through
Yes.
here that is very critical to this. Lastly, I put some links into the chat. People are asking for some things, so just in case you want anything, there's a link to in the lead up to Colombia. I'm kind of
Yes.
hosting on March 31st, like a whole thing for 4 hours on what's going to happen in Colombia. And then the conference on Colombia, somebody was asking about a link to Story in the Bone. And then I, I put in my website somewhere down there too. Okay.
This is great. And by the way, for all of those of you who see these and want to try to find some way to keep them, I will, we always have the recording uploaded on the DTN after this event. And I'll make sure that those links get included there. So you'll be able to navigate to that on the DTN and find those links. So don't worry about scurrying to be able to copy and paste them right now as you're watching. So thanks for that. And this sounds like what you were saying, Osprey, feels like it's really right on center for what we're talking about because part of my understanding from what you were saying is at Columbia there'll be discussions about the financing. And to your point, that the governments still hold so many of the strings. And if there are 80 governments recognizing the need to actually change some of those power dynamics within the financial flows, that's crucial. And that seems like that's an incredibly important leverage point.
Yeah, I would just add, the
Yeah,
question of economic dependence on fossil fuels will be
right.
one of the key pillars at the Columbia Conference. And this is so exciting because it really is a chance to deconstruct an extractive economy and
Yeah.
reimagine it and just confront it head on that this crazy mix of 500 years of colonialism, all these other power
Mm.
dynamics, the arbitrary lines that were drawn long ago for nation states, the inequities, that all of this has resulted in uh, wealth that is very hard to tell the story of, right?
Yeah.
It's not sort of clean and clear. There's a lot of wealth that was earned in very problematic ways. And we need a global discussion of just
Mhm.
how do we focus and align towards planetary thriving?
Mhm.
How do we make huge macro scale investments? Because the existing allocations of power and wealth are not ethically justifiable, period.
Exactly.
So we have to
Yeah.
find some way to talk about this that centers this is about global security for all. This is about
Yeah.
the chance to have an insurable, right,
Hmm.
economy where you could
Hmm.
actually insure a property because it's not going to burn up with
Yeah.
some very high probability. It's the chance to even do any business on a planet, right? So it is such a fundamental conversation that I hope will happen in
Hmm.
Colombia. It's going much
Wow.
deeper than the previous climate COPs,
Yes,
where
that's
it's just
exciting.
centering we need to make this transition. And Osprey, that is the point. It has to be so rapid, right?
Yeah.
We're years into the climate emergency. We need to start having massive global conversations about restoring ecosystem health, getting away from fossil fuels and other things, period. And it's about security,
Absolutely.
it's about planetary health,
Hmm.
right? The chance for all of us to have reasonably healthy lives and not sail into, you're optimistic, Osprey. We're sailing into 3 or 4 degrees right now with business as
Yeah.
usual.
Uh-huh. Hmm. No, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, we've got the great context here. So many layers to what we're talking about. Um, and what I'd like to do now is pause and go into breakout groups. And we've seen some of you put some great questions and points in the chat, which when we come back for a Q&A, either feel free to just raise your hand and ask those questions directly to us, Peter Stewart, or otherwise we'll try to catch them and intersperse them with other questions or conversations people want to share afterwards. But for right now, in the next 10 minutes, as we go into breakout groups together, I'm going to put a question for you to consider with others in those groups, which relates to everything we're talking about here. We've been talking about how we see these systems basically coming apart, systems of destruction, which are both destroying and coming apart at the same time. And we've got to like turn to our own collective, basically our coalitions of values with each other in order to empower ourselves, in order to change things. So the question that I'm asking you to consider with other people in your group is how can your own personal work and orientation help to cohere with others in a coalition of shared values? So take that in and let's kind of just spend these 10 minutes together sharing some of our perspectives, and then we'll rejoin again 10 minutes from now. So see you soon. Thank you. Oh, and that was this amazing conversation. I was blessed to have, and I hope others of you also engaged with um, people who are so inspirational as I was fortunate to do. And well, welcome back, Osprey and Stuart. Um, and now is our opportunity for others to join this conversation so it can really become a living room that we're all sharing. And I saw Common had put you had put your hand up for a moment if you wanted to speak, and then inviting people just to put your hands up if you'd like to speak. And at the same time, there's also questions from the chat that I will intersperse. And yeah, invite you to share your questions, your perspectives, comments, so we can really generate off each other in this way. So over to you, Carmen. Lovely to see you.
Hey,
Well,
thank you, and thank you for everything, as always. And we have like an international group, as always, in DTM. We're always the breakout groups are always international. Somebody from London, Australia. I'm in Colombia, in Medellin, and two from the United States. Five people were there, and we all zero in somehow. We got to the common point, and the point is how does change occur?
mm-hmm,
And the work that you're all doing, including Jeremy, with your course, which I was privileged to take 2 times, Deep Transformation. Uh, it's so from the top down, right? Policy making, governments, big money, what you were talking about, Stuart, what's happening over in the Amazons, etc. But how does change occur? I believe that it occurs, one person at a time, really. If we think about, that I am the change I want to see in the world, and the change starts with me, and expansion of consciousness, the expansion of consciousness towards a different worldview, which is not based on separation, which is based on oneness and a unitive narrative, a new story of
mm-hmm,
life. And so we were all talking about that, about
mm-hmm.
grassroots and what we were doing. And your question was perfect for the breakout group, because it's what are we doing in our local community,
Yeah.
right? So that's where you got us into the breakout room, and that's where the conversation went.
This is great. God, thank you, Colin, for bringing this in. And I would love nothing more than to hear from both Osprey and Stuart. Basically, you're obviously have to be at a summary level, but kind of your theory of change, really, like just what Colin was asking. How are we going to enable this to happen? Yeah, let's turn to you, Stuart, first. How about
I was hoping
you get the hard question
I was
first.
hoping you could go first, Osprey. You've been really there with communities around the world on the front
Yeah.
lines, supporting them, learning with them. Just beautiful. I really want to acknowledge the
Yeah.
dedication that it's taken and how much you care about this.
Mm-hmm.
Very briefly, I just want to introduce a hopeful metaphor for change.
Yeah.
There was a Nobel Prize winning chemist, Ilya Prigogine, and many
Mm-hmm.
of you know the phrase islands of coherence.
Yeah.
But there's a beautiful metaphor around this. So if you think about a phase change in a physical system, so
Mm-hmm.
you're going from liquid water to ice, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going, you're changing like physical form drastically.
Yeah.
Prigogine said there are these islands of coherence, so they're actually smaller parts of the system that start to connect and cohere with each other just before the entire system changes face. And when that's happening, all you see, they're just this huge sea that's just roiling, kind of boiling chaos,
Mm-hmm.
and just those few little islands of coherence, and they barely even know each other exist. And then you can be just so close to an entire phase shift. So what I love about this network, and I think the hopeful vision that you're providing, Jeremy, is that
Mm.
we really could be at a phase change towards an eco-civilization. It doesn't
Right.
have to be centuries long.
Hmm.
As
Yeah.
bleak as it looks, there is so much instability and chaos in the system right now. People around the world are hungering for
Hmm.
meaning and new narratives, especially young people glued to screens. They need connection, possibility, and so the hopeful metaphor is if those islands find each other very, very quickly, which they can in a highly digital world, form archipelagos of coherence, continents of coherence, we could have a phase shift very, very quickly.
Love that. Thank you, Stuart. And it's so empowering to realize that too. So thanks. And then to you, Osprey, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, thank you, Carmen, for bringing that forward, um and Stuart for your comments, which I really feel in alignment with. And I spent a whole book, The Stories in Our Bones, on this topic. So, you know, it's a big, big topic, like how change actually happens.
Yeah.
But I think to also your point, it's like if we think of things in an ecosystem that we're a part of, what I do, what I think is the world that we're creating. And so my worldview and the worldview of the people around me are absolutely what we're manifesting, our language, how we talk, how we think about things, how we relate to the earth, how we relate to each other. And so I think one of the things I would say about these different islands and the way that you were describing them, Stuart, and I actually experience them because we work with groups that are creating the islands,
Uh-huh.
is that, you know, just the other day we had brought different of the reforestation and forest protection groups that we work with in Brazil, in Ecuador, and the DR Congo. And we did this big workshop with women from all over the world who are doing reforestation work. And just actually being together was a huge energy that was beyond what everyone is doing individually, in that real sense that when we do create these systems of coherence, the amplified effect is quite profound.
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece of it. And I think the other thing is that we can't underestimate what we can do individually. And sometimes people feel like they're not doing enough or they're not doing this and they should be doing that. I think it's also about our alignment with ourselves and understanding that we're part of the ecosystem. So we have to do also what lights us up because our
Right.
story is part of the story. But the key is to then not get into this sort of isolated self-help group where now you're not relating to what is your role, your responsibilities to the greater whole, and finding that balance between my own growth personally, which then helps the worldview shift, but then not separate from rubbing up against the current context that really need interventions of change at a radical level. So I think we're trying to do all these things at the same time because unfortunately the way our society is constructed, what is inside of us is being kept from what's outside of us. And we're also trying to bring a different narrative where we are in alignment with what good living is and what
Yeah.
is good for the earth, which turns out to be the same things. And how do we get back on course with that? And in there, there is the vision of change. And the last thing I'll say on this is that I wrote a piece recently called Fire Seeds,
Hmm.
and looking at how when you look at seeds in a forest that need fire, how did
Uh-huh.
we become fire seeds right
Right.
now in a
Yeah.
we didn't start, but we're in? And how do
Yeah.
we start seeing ourselves as
Hmm.
planting seeds for the future, co-evolving with the fact of this prescribed burn, this fire that we're in. And
What?
so
Yeah.
I would just leave that as a thought, like how do we view ourselves not in some sort of way separate from the fact that we're in a burn. We are in a burn.
Love that.
So let
Wow.
it burn down, but let it be prescribed and let us be the seeds that are going to burst forward
Yeah.
into this new time with the things that we know
Hmm.
really matter to all of us as a species.
What a powerful metaphor. I love that, Osprey. Thank you so much. And so some of what you're saying, I often write about what I call fractal flourishing, that the individual flourishing, group flourishing, and societal and world flourishing are all connected. And there's almost like this notion of fractal transformation, just like you were describing. And before we move on to the next question, let's bring you in, Nancy. I did want to just call out, I noticed that Sandra Waddock had put in the chat. Um, Thank you, Sandra, for bringing to our attention. Sandra is the author of a book called Catalyzing Transformation, which I found absolutely enlightening and really, really gets into a lot of these issues we're talking about in a profound way. So I recommend that book to anybody interested in these questions. And let's turn to Nancy.
I apologize.
Welcome.
My camera is broken. I would love to be
Yeah.
interacting more directly. I am profoundly grateful for today's conversation. Timing it is perfect. My question is there's like three tensions.
Hmm.
One are the intentions. We can think of them as system requirements, design specs, are shared intentions that will emerge and become much clearer in the April conference.
Hmm.
And then there's all of the local variations on that across all disciplines and localized living and so forth, each of them manifesting their variations on it, which is really healthy. That's what we want. And then there's the tension in the existing systems to somehow, no matter what money is intended to do, to end up back reinforcing the wrong systems in the wrong pockets for the wrong purposes. So I didn't hear the question framed. I'd love to hear it framed and how it will be part of the conversation that
Mm.
occurs at the conference. Thank you.
Wow, thanks. Either of you want to riff off that?
Sure. Could you just state the question just like a little bit more concisely? Because
Yeah,
there,
concisely, money intended for good purposes ends up through established corruption,
Mhm.
lying, distortion. The systems are extremely good at sucking it up. And all the communities we've talked about have experienced it. That's my question.
Mm.
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. It's a great question. I mean, this is what I was talking about earlier, like how do we have the world that we want where the money's being used in a good way and the way we are now, not gliding past each other,
Yeah.
but connecting.
Uh-huh.
And this is a point of tension that we have
And
to
and
address.
also, excuse me, and having it at the same time highly distributed and locally controlled.
Mhm.
That's it's
Yeah.
not controlled from the top in some accountability way.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
I do think that there are some fantastic models like the circular economy that are really powerful to name one of them, or the well-being economy where people, or the buen vivir economy coming from indigenous peoples. I mean, I think there's a lot of different strata and examples of economies that do exactly what you're talking about, which is how money gets distributed, how markets take place, and how they feed into, a localized regional economy. There's
Mhm.
even people, as you might know, that have, local currencies so that the money stays, like the Berkshire shares, like the money can stay locally. So I love the creativity people have in this space about how to even have timeshares where you're not even exchanging anything financial, you're exchanging time for services. So I think the creativity of how we can trade and have markets has been practiced for a long time before extractive economies and before capitalism. So I think those systems are there, or this idea of mutual beneficial relationships where you know that you're part of a community and therefore you can create a positive debt in the sense of things that you may need, but then you pay it forward some other time. So again, I think there's so many creative and successful ideas about how we do this, but your first part of your question is like about how do we stop this bad stuff from happening,
Right.
basically, is really tough. So just one comment on that, just to give one example, is that right now in the world of reforestation, a lot of that has been taken over by these programs, government programs. There's many different names, but they're basically different forms of carbon offsets, where the idea is that a fossil fuel company, a very large fossil fuel company, can purchase carbon offsets, meaning that they can then say that they are supporting forest protection in some country like Ecuador, Brazil, to save the Amazon, and then they can continue polluting and extracting oil because now they
Yeah.
have these offsets to the carbon that they're creating,
Yeah.
which is exactly the wrong use of the money.
Hmm.
There is lots of money being given to corporations and to different entities and governments into those programs for carbon offsets where people are trying to profit off of pollution, not
Right.
stopping pollution at the source because it doesn't stop the pollution. It just quote unquote offsets. Those offset programs don't even work, which is too wonky of a story for here. But the point is that millions and millions of dollars are set up for these frameworks for a really bad solution to occur because it means that capitalism can continue and those in power can continue to financially gain. And so to put it in a nutshell, the biggest thing is we have to create the consciousness and the mindset that we no longer need to profit off of pollution and that people can still have markets and they have to get decoupled from capitalism. And that's the
Hmm.
shortest way I can say it, that we need to be able to have trade at a localized level and markets can be there, but they have to be pulled away from endless economic growth patterns
Hmm.
that also are feeding the wealthy elite who are killing us all. So it's
Yeah.
also about toppling the large elite that are now, becoming gazillionaires that creates enormous inequity financially, but also in power. And so
Yeah.
these things are all interlocked.
So,
Beautifully well said, Osprey. Thank you
so,
so much for that. Yeah.
can I jump in,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Jeremy?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful, Osprey. Totally agree. And at Buckminster Fuller Institute, we think a lot about readiness of territories, landscapes,
Uh-huh.
bioregions for receiving enormous amounts of wealth and being prepared for global decisions that can actually move resources towards fundamental thriving and moving away from the climate emergency. So readiness practically means you need governance. So funds don't just arrive and cause corruption or cause terrible conflict in a community. You need to be
Right.
ready to receive large amounts of funds. And so financing systems that are regenerative, knowledge systems that reflect traditional local knowledge, so that as funds arrive, they can flow to beautiful portfolios of regenerative projects like Amazon Sacred Headwaters is
Yes.
pioneering. And there are amazing ways to just invest in readiness. And we're in discussions around an Amazon-wide process to
Mhm.
actually allocate large sums of money so that they can flow to a readiness, grant to get moving so that every bioregion in the Amazon, every territory can be ready to receive these kinds of global payments.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. And yeah, and driven by decentralized governance so that
Yes,
it's already that in place.
decentralized
Yeah,
governance and
exactly.
just practically 1,000 landscapes for 1 billion
Hmm.
people.
It's
It's doing
enormous.
beautiful work. They've
Yeah.
created a framework called integrated landscape management. Just very
Great.
practical. It's all about creating a shared community vision, getting to work, flowing regenerative resources to projects on the ground.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
I
And
would just
yeah,
add one
yeah.
thing so we can come back to the question that was asked, which is the trick here is how to create those financial flows that are not investment dollars.
Yes.
That's
Yes,
where it goes off the cliff. You've got
yes,
the system, the beautiful system that you've set up, Stuart, or people at Amazon Headwaters. And so we see these opportunities, but what happens is that investors want to make money off of the investment they
Right.
made, and then it goes right back into the corrupt system we have.
Yeah.
So that's what we have to really look at globally is how are we going to get reparations fund,
yes.
philanthropic dollars to do this work and see it as money that is owed.
Yeah.
Because
It's
otherwise, we create debt or we create more and more financial gain for the wealthy elite who are making money off of it. And there's going to be a price to pay. As I
Mhm.
say, there's no free lunches in capitalism.
Yeah. No,
it's
thank
That's
you.
the
That's
catch.
great.
it's
Thanks.
it's
Yeah.
it's reparations
Yeah.
payments, it's fundamental payments for global security, for global health,
Yeah.
to preserve the health of ecosystems. And
Thanks.
those are not investments, exactly. They're meant to be public
Yeah.
finance or even moving towards visionary commons-based
Exactly.
approaches. We shouldn't be investing in nature at
Yeah.
all. It is life, it is the source of everything. We should be giving to nature. We're taking way too much already. No investor should get anything else.
And that's what scholar David Bollier has coined a term transvestment.
Yes.
Cover exactly that.
Brilliant.
So,
Yeah.
Nancy, your question was generative. It got people really going. Thank you for that. And of course, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we've got three people with their hands up patiently. So, what I'd like to invite is each of you, Carol, Lynn, and Manuel, if we can spotlight all three of you and just have you ask each of your questions and try to keep them fairly framed, just so we can hold the space for each of those questions. And then I'll invite Osprey and Stuart just to respond to whatever, feels alive to them, if that's okay. So can we begin with, I think it was Lynn, was it not? Who was first? Or was it Carol? Carol,
I think
sorry.
it's me.
Yeah.
I just like just a couple things. One is I think basically what I was going to say has kind of been said, that what brings us together is our universal values. As you said, our oneness, but the idea of trust, the idea of unity, the idea of that each person that's living, actually each living thing on this planet has a right to be here and needs to be protected or preserved. But my main question, as you can see in the background, this is Lai Atoll in the Marshall Islands. I've lived for over 30 years in the Marshall Islands. And of course, it's one of the atoll nations that will disappear with climate change. So the population in the Pacific being affected by this is small. But what about the large cities? The major cities of the world are on coastlines. And I never hear much discussion about for climate refugees and how we see that being dealt with. All these changes you've talked about, all these needs you've talked about, yes, we need these and we need to stop climate change or slow it down or do whatever we can, no matter what it takes. But what about the people? What about the animals? But let's say the people first. And there's going to be billions of climate refugees, not just a few million. There potentially is billions. And all these people moving around, we can't even begin to handle the refugees we have today. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that into the space, Carol. Very important. And let me turn to you, Lynn, ask you if you want to share your.
My question is a simple one, but a toughie. How can we organize in small communities, which I think this is what we must do, in decentralization? However, at the same time, we have to be connected. And how can we use those connections and avoid allowing our connectivity to be controlled from the top down? How can we do what Mary Parker Follett asked us to do, share power with, not have power over? Okay, that's it.
Like you say, simple question and a tough one. I love that. And thank you. And Manuel, can we turn to you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jeremy. First of all, thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Osprey. First of all, this is really great. Thank you. I'm from Colombia. So I just wanted to say I'm proud of Colombia hosting this conference. I know a lot of good people down there. And I have worked a lot in Colombia with Evolución Colombia, people like Adam Kahane and others. And so there are a lot of good people who want to change for the better. Colombia, as you know, has a history of war and violence for the last 50 years. So this is a new chapter, and anything we can do to support this new chapter of Latin America will be great. I don't have a question, except maybe Osprey, just briefly, what would be the overarching purpose of this conference in Colombia, or key objective, if you could repeat that again. And finally, I just have to say, there are people in this meeting here. We have Steve Waddell, who's on the call, who's reading a wonderful book called Global Action Networks, which I recommend to everyone who wants to collaborate and coordinate. And then you have Sandra Wada right on this call with catalyzing change. So we have a lot of talent here. We need to put it to action, work, etc. Collaboration. Osprey, that's it.
And then not to forget Randy Hayes, who's been joining us at this meeting too, who's spent his life working on this transformative work too. So thanks for that. And just we are just a little bit past time. I've got a couple of announcements to make, but let me turn to you, Osprey and Stuart, just to leave us with some final words that you can share with us as we.
Go ahead, Stuart. I did the last one first. You go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll go after you.
Yeah.
Well, to the question of how can we stay connected and not sort of have that co-opted in some way, I have been reaching out to anybody that I discover doing something fascinating, extraordinary that might be just that like the very edge of what I'm beginning to think about. I just reach out, and almost always they're just so excited to connect. So keep growing at the very edge of possibility. People that are inspiring you, right? That are hopefully in a different discipline, different cultural context, as different from you as possible, but yet there's a profound resonance and just
Yeah.
find that support.
Mm.
And just to my closing thought, gratitude. I'm so glad this space is available to all of us to think about deep transition. It's what we need in the world.
Mhm.
Keep your courage. Find others that are trying to find this way through. That is the only sane thing to do. And we're surrounded by a sea of misinformation and insanity. So remember, what we're trying to do on this call is the
Okay.
sane thing to do.
Thank you,
I just
Stuart.
did a code
Beautiful.
because I'm going to put the new lock. There's a
Yeah.
special thing. And I'll finish
Yeah.
tomorrow.
And
No, there's
Osprey.
the code of
Oh, okay, good. I think somebody else was
Yeah.
weighing in here. Well, first of all, it's just really great to be with all of you. And as both Manuel and Jeremy named a lot of really amazing people who are also really contributing so much, all of you in different ways. So thank you for this beautiful network that you've generated. It is, wonderful seeds to plant as we go forward. Everyone has a seed they can plant.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, to answer your question, Manuel, I think the main thing that's happening in Colombia is just some space to have a frank conversation about getting off of fossil fuels without the interference of the fossil fuel lobbyists, without the interference of the fossil fuel producing countries, to really look at how can we do this. And I think that's what's really exciting about this moment as a model, as Jeremy started the call with, about looking at an almost impossible situation. We've been on fossil fuels for a really long time. We've lived on Earth way longer without them. How do we convince ourselves that we need this addiction? How do we build a world that depends on fossil fuels and other extractions that are not working for us, a economy that is not working for us, social systems that aren't working for us, health systems that aren't working for us? We could name them all. So how in this moment do we look at Colombia, sure, as a piece of negotiating space? But what I love about it is also the implications of creating momentum at a government level for transformative change, where we're actually looking at getting the thing done we need to get done, and people are collecting to have that conversation. And I think that's a good model for us to be looking at other conversations that have to be had with the people who want to go forward. And it doesn't mean we're leaving other folks behind. We need, got to do this collectively for sure. But we also need to generate our own spaces like you've created here so that we can really think things through and push those agendas forward that are life enhancing, that are for the earth, that are for future generations, where we are speaking a common language of life. And I think that's really what we need to do. And I'll leave one last thought with everyone, which is the vision of the lunar eclipse last night. I don't know if people were able to see that. I was up at 3 a.m. where I live in California, and it was so powerful to realize that all the stuff we're talking about is happening on this living planet in a dance in this universe and a cosmology so much bigger. And so I think this is one of the things we need to remember, in addition to the communities that we're building with each other, is the community of Earth, the rivers, the forests, the moon, the mountains, and the stars. And to remember that we can also draw from the power of something much bigger than us that we're a part of.
Beautiful. Wow, Osprey and Stuart, thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and expertise and insights, and then leaving us with this great, deep wisdom. So appreciate. And And before people go, just wanted to make a couple of important announcements for our community. And in a way, it's kind of a counterpoint to Manuel having like named some of the great leading thinkers that we have on this call. So appreciate that. Actually, next month is your opportunity. If you're somebody who's not a well-known, prominent change maker or anything like that, for you to be part of share what you're doing here on the DTN. Thank you, Taya, who I believe is still here on this call, who's been organizing this now for a couple of months. We're having our first ever session on the DTN of flash lightning talks kind of thing for our entire session, where we're inviting all members to share 5 to 10 minutes about their work, their project, or your passion. And particularly, we're inviting people who don't usually get heard or seen. So, oh, I'm not one of those kind of people who get known. We're inviting you to share what you have, and it could be anything from relevant humor or comedy, or singing poetry or dance, or talking about your work in unsung quarters, or something you're doing in quietly in local communities that you think, well, no one's going to want to care about that, but may inspire people. So I'm going to put a link to a post that Taya has put up. And she's already received a number of people volunteering to do this. So we may even have a little bit of a wait list. So, but if you do feel you'd like to have an opportunity, maybe a chance to contribute, go to that link and then contact Taya directly once you see what it's about. And then one final announcement I wanted to make is we are also having a follow-on live group meeting on Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, which is really specifically around a quieter, more reflective follow-on from this live, more public conversation. It's a smaller group of people invited to just be together and reflect in community, led by Larry and Mimu, who have taken this over recently. Thank you to you both. Using kind of qualities like from beloved community circles of deep reflective community building, listening within ourselves, and sharing that with others. So make sure I'll put those links also in the upload that I give of this event later on today, but make sure you explore those. And thanks again, Osprey and Stuart, and look forward to seeing you both here on the DTN more in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Thanks.